So the next speaker is Peter Jacobs.
Okay, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Peter Jacobs. I've got a few hats around the room, but I'm actually here this morning to talk about Victorian Deer Control in the network that we've established. I also work for the Invasive Species Council part-time, and we provide a bit of support to the network in terms of giving it executive support and keeping it going. So that's sort of the other role. And of course, I also work for land care, so I've got an interest in deer sort of across the board, really. So I was just going to talk a bit about, I've been asked to talk a bit about the network. But firstly, I'd just like to say it's really, we just ran a forum a bit like this, of course. You can sick of me already.
Yeah, be careful.
What was I going to say? Yeah, we ran a forum similar to this over in Brighton about 3 weeks ago through the land care network there. It was the first deer forum that was actually run over there. Bryce not that far, the upper uplands, there's some crowflies across here. But it was really an entry-level forum, really to start to raise awareness about deer for the right community, whereas this is your third forum, as I understand, so you've been dealing with this for a long time. And we had some people like Brett and Lynn and others come over that as well. So it's really nice, I think, to get these forums going right across the board for people in terms of raising their interest and awareness in deer. So indeed, that's really what the network's all about. And I'll talk a bit more at the end there about our objectives. But it really actually started more in the peri-urban area where there are people working on deer. But it sort of became fairly obvious quickly that as the issue was growing and awareness was growing, there was no real central point of people getting information about deer. Certainly the government organisations were doing their work, lots of land care groups were doing things, people were doing bits and pieces, but there was a bit of frustration, there was no sort of central coordination or sharing of information. So it grew out of there, particularly around the Gardenia, sort of Dandenongs area, and now we've got the state-wide network in place with about 140 members, and it's growing all the time. And really the only requirement to be part of the network is you've got interest in reducing the impact of deer in Victoria on a whole range of assets and interests. So that's what it's all about, and we'll talk more about that. But some of the work that we do is talk to groups and try to raise awareness. So I was just going to talk a bit about the deer species, their population and distribution. I'll go quickly over that because you probably know a lot of that. But particularly the impacts, we have had some information come out quite recently about the actual monetising, the impact of deer in Victoria, some of the control options and what the network's actually all about. So I suppose from our perspective, now one of the most serious environmental and agricultural threats that are emerging right across Australia, not just Victoria. And indeed Victoria probably has the largest deer population, but as Stefan said, it's really difficult to get a handle on numbers, and as time goes on, hopefully we will get a better hold on what the actual numbers of deer are in Victoria. But nevertheless, we know there are a lot, and the strategy talks about there being up to a billion deer. And that figure's been bandied about for probably 3 or 4 years now, so we don't really know. But we do know they're expanding pretty rapidly and invading new areas, which is becoming a real problem. And some of the common species, and people in the room know this much better than I, such as Barry, but the species you'll see here particularly are fallow deer and sambar deer. As we know, sambar deer are the largest of the species, up to about 300 kilograms, inhabit a lot of forest areas, they're pretty much forest dwellers. They can be sort of solitary, but also people do report seeing them in large groups as well. But this is the biggest of the deer and the ones, I suppose, that certainly important for hunting, but also causing quite a lot of damage across the environment, particularly the forested environment. And of course, fallow deer, which you see up here as well, see much more on the interface with private property because they're probably more of a grazer, and you'll often see them as I do on my property, out in the paddocks in the mornings and the evenings grazing on that property, and then quickly run into the forest and then come back out again. So that's nothing new to people around here, but for people in Bright, for example, this is news because they're just starting to learn about deer. And of course, red deer is the other population. I'm not sure if there are red deer around this area.
Over the border.
Yes.
Yeah. Places like the Grampians has got a really quite a big population of red deer. And of course the smaller hog deer, which are coastal dwellers on sort of West Gippsland and the Crom, places like that. So interesting 4 main species. There's a couple of others that have been recorded, but it's really of the species in Victoria, these are the ones that we'll see, but up here pretty much Samba and Holt here, sort of through the eastern part of Victoria. So some pretty good information now. There's not so much on numbers, but certainly distribution. So the left-hand side there, it's got a little. I'm going to turn it off. I think it's got a little.
Yeah, you were pointing there somewhere.
Oh, was it? Oh, yeah, there we go. Where's it gone?
Shut up.
No, it's not going to. That's right. On the right-hand side there, you just see the that sort of lime green colour, the populations of recorded fallow deer. So you see there's smaller populations scattered around the state. The big shaded area that you might be able to see pretty much all of eastern Victoria, of course, is where Samba deer are inhabiting Victoria. The red blobs, you'll see the big red blob across there in the Grampians, show the red deer population, and of course the hog deer along the coast around the prominent West Gippsland. Hopefully this is going to work on the right-hand side. So just keep an eye on this right-hand side here. This is the recorded records of deer going back to 1920s. You'll see it's quite small at the moment. You'll see it's starting to grow. The screens are not showing up that well, but you'll see it in a minute. So watch the years as the recordings have grown. So seeing the Samba deer starting to pop up there in West Gippsland. Going to the 70s, the hog deer popping up along the coast. Then you see the Samba deer really starting to pop up right across the eastern part of Victoria. Red deer popping up across in the west around the Grampians. And as we get towards 2020, it's really starting to fill out. So, and you see the fallow deer popping up there as well. So I guess the message there is, you know, the growth has been quite significant, particularly since the 70s and 80s. I guess there are several theories and reasons behind that, but nevertheless, you see there it is spread. And the important thing about that, that's only recorded. So it's not suggesting you aren't deer in other places, but it's indicating where the records, if you're using Feral Scan or the Victorian Biodiversity Atlas or one of those records, they'll get picked up by the Arthur Isler Institute in doing this work, work on where deer actually occurring. We just, the Invasive Species Council just commissioned some work from Frontier Economics to look at monetising the impact of deer on Victoria. Pretty difficult thing. It's sort of, there's certainly no suggestion this is sort of entirely accurate, because doing this economic analysis is quite difficult. But they have done some work, and the report was just released last week, and you might have heard we've had a little bit of meeting about that this week. But what they came up with, and this is a report that's independently done by Frontier Economics, they've come up with they believe over the next 30 years, if nothing's done further about minimising the impact of deer, the cost to the community will reach between $1.5 billion and $2.1 billion. So a significant figure, I guess in anyone's terms. And they basically only looked at 4 factors. They looked at the impact on agriculture, the impact on forestry, the impact of deer-related accidents, and also the impact on recreational use. And you can see the different percentages there in terms of where they are. Deer-related accidents are actually came up the highest. It surprised me when they came up with that, but their analysis is that if deer numbers continue to increase the way they are, based on the number of accidents we're having at the moment, this is the sort of cost that's going to occur over the next 30 years. Now, I guess the important thing about this is gives us a guide. It's telling us what these costs are likely to be. It's not sort of obviously accurate down to the last dollar. But it's giving us an indication of where the biggest impacts are across Victoria. And the important thing is that the actual impact on the environment or indigenous cultural values are not included here. So the impact on alpine peatlands and bogs, where we see deer get into there, the impact potentially on water supplies, the impact generally on biodiversity, it's really hard to put a dollar value on. So they haven't tried to. So I guess what we do know is the figure's probably going to be quite a lot higher than that if you take in all those values as well. So for agriculture, these are what we call quantifiable impacts. They're ones that I put a monetary value on. I won't read them out. You can see the figures there. They're quite significant due to, and agriculture was just based on the impact on grazing and pasture. It wasn't looking at vineyards or impact on orchards or all those other things. It's just using things they can actually grasp and put a dollar value on. Forestry, we'll actually be talking later, but we had Amy spoke to the Bright forum a few weeks ago. Some scary stuff from plantations coming out there. Car accidents and recreational use is if Yeah, recreational use is just what might occur in terms of reducing people's visitor experience. And of course, as I said, there are unquantifiable impacts around biodiversity. So 13 threatened flora species, 12 ecological communities that are threatened, and as Delta said, over 1,000 species of flora and fauna are being impacted. So these are other things that need to be taken into account. You see, in the network, we, a bit like Stephanie was saying, talk about what do you do statewide? And I suppose the strategy that we're sort of trying to put forward is that, yeah, deer again, you're not going to be leaving eastern Victoria anytime soon, whether you want to or not. It's not going to happen. So this sort of approach, what we call a biosecurity approach, talks about, well, where do you prevent them? The most important thing is stopping deer getting where they are currently. Where do you then eradicate them from? Because you're not going to eradicate them, but there are parts of Victoria that potentially they could be eradicated from. You could potentially eradicate red deer from the Grampians. It's doable. You're going to eradicate them from the Alpine National Park? No. But there are important assets that are protected in that area, which Neil will talk more about shortly. So taking a strategic approach statewide, I guess is something that we put forward, and look, frankly, this is no great argument for this. I think most people agree this is what's got to be done. So it's a matter of chipping away and putting the money where you're getting the best bang for the buck. And of course, there are lots of options for control. We talk about lethal methods there, using ground shooting, professional pest controllers, ground shooting by landowners, ground shooting using hunters, accredited volunteers, commercial harvesters, aerial shooting, of course, also using professional pest controllers, and things like thermal scopes and drones is technology that's really helping to make these programs more effective. And there is some trial work being done on baiting, that's certainly not permitted in Victoria at the moment, but it might be a tool in the future, so it might be available, but obviously it's a controversial one, and there'll be lots of debate about that. Places like Bright, we also talk about non-lethal methods, because lethal methods aren't always an option for people, particularly around the peri-urban areas. So exclusion fencing, and things like down at the Flora Reserve, down there at Pheasant Creek, there's fences around there that people are putting in fences to exclude deer, repellents, deterrents. Trapping is something that's being used a little bit more as well. So there are ways of actually dealing with non-lethally, and certainly from Lancaster's perspective, we're putting in really big tree guards now and fences because our plantings are just getting chewed all the time down by deer. So the network, coming back to that, was launched, about a year ago now at the Australasian Vertebrate Pest Conference. So really the objective of the network is to share information, to build knowledge and capacity, to raise awareness in the community, and we'll advocate for effective policy and control programs. Not everyone in the network agrees. We don't necessarily have a common policy. There will be different organisations in the network that have different views on things. So if there's something being put forward, it's only something that we'd agree with as a whole group. Individual groups will still go off and do their own advocacy where they need to do that. We'll continue to advocate for adequate funding and resources as we will use the economic impact study to push for that and identify opportunities for collaboration. So we've got about 130 members who I've got there. We've got a committee, the executive, I said, is supported by the Invasive Species Council. We've got a new web page that we just launched last week. The web page is really designed to be very resource rich. It's got lots of information on it. It's got lots of papers on it. It's got ideas around methods, suggestions if you need to do fencing, who can help with the fencing, things like commercial harvesting, you can go and get support with that. So it's worth having a look at that. It does have lots of information. We'll keep building on that as time goes on. So hopefully we have got a group, a network where people can really work together and share information. So I encourage you to have a look at that, and if you'd like to join, certainly do that. It doesn't cost anything, all it does is give you a full opportunity to share information. So yeah, that's me.
Thanks, Peter. So how do people join if they want to? So what do they do?
Just go to the website. It's the Victoria, if they Google Victorian Deer Control Community Network, the website will come up. There's a spot there that just says, get involved, become a member, go in there and just join online, so it's quite easy. It also gives you access to a members-only area as well, which we're building now, where people can have discussions and forums and share information just for members, so it can be a bit more sort of controlled, I suppose.
It's really worth getting involved. Certainly for us starting, we've learned so much. And what we loved is the sharing of information. So what's happening at this local level is now happening statewide, where we're just helping everybody have a crack and sharing information. So,
You got that nice new video I tapped, perhaps on there now too.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you,
All right,
Peter.
thanks.